everybody, welcome back. My name is Cassie. I talk about books and I review books on my channel. And today I'm doing a review for A Curse in Ash, which was the book in the Unplugged book box for January. And it is by Julie Zatopoulos. And I believe she has a YouTube channel where she also does book reviews. And this is her debut novel, and this is an urban fantasy. So typically I enjoy urban fantasy. I guess I would say that it's definitely not like my favorite as far as if I'm comparing fantasy series, but I do typically enjoy it. It's never quite rated as high as I would say a traditional fantasy, but they're usually something I enjoy, and often I have kind of the urban fantasy itch. So in those times it's fun to pick them up, because then I kind of get to scratch that itch and say, okay, I got my urban fantasy, and usually it's like every couple of months I have a desire to get into an urban fantasy. So this one for like an introduction to a series, which I presume is going to be a series based on how it ends and just based on what I know about urban fantasy. Most urban fantasy series seem to never end, which is fine. You know, it definitely means that if I have the desire to read one, that the series that maybe I started a long time ago is probably coming out with something new. So overall, like for an introduction to urban fantasy, it was pretty good. I think there had to be like a lot of backstory and stuff in this because it's the first one. This book, the second half, I liked a lot more than the first half. And I get that the first half was just a lot of build up and stuff, but the first half was also kind of slow. And for me, for the urban fantasy, I like them a little bit more fast paced. And I also like a lot more blood, guts, and violence than was in this book. So, which, like I said, she's at that point, you're building up the characters, you're trying to get to know the characters, what they're about, what they want. So, like, I get that you have to do that. So, yeah, so the first half, I struggled with a little bit because I was wanting a little bit more action and a little bit more blood, guts, and gore. The two main characters, Aslan and Riordan. Obviously, whenever I see Riordan's name, I think of Rick Riordan, and so it makes me think of Percy Jackson. I'm picturing Percy Jackson as I'm reading this book. But you know, Percy Jackson, I guess it's fine. And then I kind of got, especially like I said, in the first half, like the dialogue. I kind of struggled with the dialogue. Like it was kind of slow. I guess we all know people do normal everyday things, but it seemed to kind of make the story just drag a little bit. Yeah, we have to know like what they do for work and all that kind of stuff. You know, some of the things that they talked about was just kind of, in my view, just wasn't very interesting. It did kind of pick up after that. And then there was, I don't know if you would call it a love triangle. Yeah, it's definitely a love triangle. I'm not a fan of love triangles. I'm not really a fan of love triangles, and this one was really weird, and yet, as far as like love triangles I've read, this one actually was better than most. And I think that the reason for that was that the one of them is Fae, and she's Fae, and so those two are gonna live forever, and then they're like betrothed, they're supposed to get married, and yes, they obviously care deeply about each other. But then the other person in the love triangle, like, he's human. I guess, you know, when you're immortal and then the human, if they die, then you get to be with the immortal. Because the human will die, right? Because that's part of humanity. And I'm not sure if, like, the author kind of set it up that way. Because if this ends up being a series that goes on forever, yes, eventually the human is going to get old and die. And she'll still be alive, and her immortal betrothed will still be alive, and then they can be together. And it sounds like the Fae have different standards as far as relationships go compared to humans, probably because they look at it from the standpoint of being immortal. Okay, so the story. So we have Aslan and we have Riordan, and she is a half witch, half Fae, but like a high Fae. So it's like one of the leaders of the Fae has had an affair with this witch, and this is the offspring. And it makes her very powerful as far as her magic goes, one of the most powerful that anyone has ever seen, and apparently she can do all sorts of cool stuff. Roden is like this stranger that comes to town, although he's like, he has a history in the town, and he's kind of been warned not to be there, but him and Aslan form this like kind of strange magical bond when they first touch, that bonds them together, which I know it's a book, so it's like whoever's supposed to be together, that's up to the author. So it's not like you can ever really remove fate from a book, but it felt kind of like they took away their choice. And Raritan was kind of upset about that they took away his choice, that he didn't get to wasn't be able to choose to have this bond, and it just happened. And he kind of got over it pretty quick, even though it didn't seem like that was part of the character that was trying to be built. So sometimes I felt like the characters made choices and they did things that didn't quite make sense with who they were. Unless that's really just who they were and they were just pretending to be someone else, but it didn't come across that way. Alright, I will say that as far as the romance goes, there was enough. I don't mind like a little bit of romance in the book, in a book. I just don't like it when it takes away from the story. And so it kind of felt like the first half was really kind of building up the romance, and then there's little things going on in between. So I guess in that way it wasn't too bad. It did really, it wasn't like it was out of the blue, like you knew these two wanted each other and they knew that the other one wanted them. It's almost like they never really took time to get to know each other. They just kind of ended up being together. Alright, it's a book. You only have so many pages to get our characters together, and that's fine. And I think that this really pushed or hit my limit as far as how much romance I'm comfortable with in a book. So it was right there. It was like almost just spot on. Like any more and I would have probably not liked it. And it could do with less. It could always do with less. I'm always happy if there's less. But it was like right on the borderline. If there had been much more of the romance, it would have started to take away from the story. But because the first halves have been building these relationships and getting these characters enmeshed and working together, it worked better the way that the author put it together. So I can't even say that I didn't like the romance. I think it did okay. It wasn't so overbearing that it took away from the story. And it is really these three people's relationship with each other that was driving the whole plot line and everything, and that their relationship together is what helps them overcome whatever adversity is out for them. So anyway, getting back to like what the story's about. So Aslan finds out that there's a threat against her life, and her Fae fiance and his friends have come to make sure that she's safe and that she won't die and all that. And her bonded human tries to do what he can, but obviously he's not strong enough to fight against the Fae. But he still tries to be there and protect her, and obviously gets jealous of her immortal betrothed. So as far as urban fantasy goes, I would say it's a pretty straightforward, pretty common story in urban fantasy. I think it was just okay. Can't say that I absolutely loved the book. It certainly wouldn't be like high up there of my favorites or anything. I didn't hate it. I guess the biggest thing is if I would continue the series. And it did scratch that itch as far as I wanted to read an urban fantasy, and it was an urban fantasy, and I feel like I'm good. I got my urban fantasy book in till I feel the need to read another one. I think that I would, if there is another book, which I imagine there will be, I would pick it up. I would probably pick it up to see what happens, because it was interesting enough that I would be willing to continue. And especially the way it ended, I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen next? So it was interesting enough that I want to know what happens next. I did kind of appreciate some of the risks that the author took as far as dispatching certain characters and stuff like that, though. Thought, okay, that's okay. You could take a little bit more risk, though, like kill some really important people, and But overall, I thought that was pretty good as well. But again, if this is part of a series, then we have some time to go before some opportunities to maybe make some things happen that are really interesting for the characters. So that's kind of my review. It's kind of a hit or miss for me. I think so far every book in the Unplugged book box so far has been not my favorite, and this one is no exception. But this one and the last one, I noticed that both of them, like the first half, I really struggled, and then the second half did a lot better, and I liked them a lot more. I mean, enough that both those series I would be willing to continue. I hope the author keeps writing. I hope she keeps going with this series. I would be interested to know what happens next. Alright, so that is my review of the A Curse in Ash by Julie Zatopoulos. I'll leave a link to the Unplugged book box so that you can see what that is if you're interested in a subscription. It is kind of expensive. It's like $40 a month, I think, plus shipping. But I have had fun with it. I think I've enjoyed the stuff in the box more than the books, even like the candles and everything. So I guess I'll have to see what comes in February. Alright, so thank you guys all for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye!